Lauryn Hill questioned Amy Winehouse's street credibility. What happened next changed how the hip-hop legend understood authenticity forever. November 2005, London. A basement venue in Brixton, tucked beneath a record shop that most tourists never noticed. One of those underground music gatherings where established artists and newcomers collided after hours, where the real industry business happened away from corporate boardrooms and publicity machines. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and creative tension. Vintage amplifiers lined the walls alongside faded posters of jazz legends and hip-hop pioneers. The kind of place where reputations were made and destroyed in a single performance, where a moment of genuine artistry could change everything. Maybe 40 people in total, mostly musicians, producers, A&R scouts operating off the books, and a few music journalists who knew where the real conversations happened. Everyone checking everyone else out, measuring talent against reputation, waiting for someone to prove themselves or expose themselves as fraudulent. Lauryn Hill was in London promoting her MTV Unplugged album, taking a break from her self-imposed exile from mainstream music. She'd been the queen of conscious hip-hop, the artist who proved rap could be intellectual, soulful, and commercially successful. The miseducation of Lauryn Hill had redefined what female artists could achieve. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd conquered multiple worlds. Amy Winehouse was still relatively unknown outside London's jazz scene. Frank had been released 2 years earlier to critical acclaim, but limited commercial success. She was building a reputation in underground venues, but many still saw her as another retro throwback, a white girl playing with black musical traditions she didn't understand. The gathering was informal yet electrically charged, musicians sharing stories and occasionally picking up instruments scattered around the space. Someone had set up a small PA system with vintage microphones. An acoustic guitar sat in the corner like a patient witness, and people took turns performing when the mood struck them, or when liquid courage demanded artistic expression. The basement had perfect acoustics, every note hanging in the air longer than expected. Lauryn arrived around midnight with a small entourage, her presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd conquered multiple worlds and knew her place in music history. She wore simple clothes, no designer labels or flashy jewelry, but carried herself like royalty. Everyone recognized her immediately, but no one approached directly. There was an invisible circle of respect around her, the kind veteran artists earn through undeniable talent and cultural impact. She commanded attention not through arrogance, but through sheer presence, through the weight of her achievements and the intelligence in her eyes. When Lauryn spoke, rooms listened. She'd earned that respect through artistry that mattered, through music that changed lives. Amy was already there, sitting quietly near the back wall, nursing a glass of red wine, observing the social dynamics with the detached fascination of an outsider looking in. She wore dark clothes, minimal makeup, her signature beehive hair still developing into the iconic style it would become. Her reputation was growing slowly through word of mouth in London's underground scene, but she still felt like an interloper in many musical circles, especially when hip-hop royalty entered the room. She learned to read rooms before speaking, to understand hierarchies before attempting to navigate them. Tonight, she was content to watch and absorb, filing away conversations and interactions for later artistic use. The conversation turned to authenticity in music. Someone mentioned how younger artists were borrowing from older traditions without understanding their context. It was a topic close to Lauryn's heart, given her academic approach to hip-hop and neo-soul. The problem with these new artists, Lauryn said, her voice cutting through the ambient conversation like a scalpel, is they think technique equals authenticity. They study the sound, but they haven't lived the experience. They're making music about struggles they've never faced, singing about pain they've never felt. It's musical tourism, borrowing other people's trauma for artistic credibility. A few people nodded in agreement, some shifting uncomfortably. In 2005, this was becoming a heated topic in music circles, the ongoing debate about cultural appropriation and artistic authenticity. Everyone in the room had opinions, but few had Lauryn's platform or credibility to voice them so directly. You can always tell the difference, Lauryn continued, her eyes scanning the room with laser focus, between someone who's lived it and someone who's just studied it in conservatory or read about it in books. Real music comes from real experience. Street music comes from the actual street, not from suburban bedrooms where kids play dress up with other people's pain. The room tension was building. Several artists present could feel the critique applied to them, wondering if Lauryn was speaking generally or targeting specific people. Conversation stopped entirely now. All attention focused on her words. Her eyes scanned the room methodically and landed directly on Amy. Take someone like... She paused, recognizing Amy from recent industry photos and buzz. Amy Winehouse. Technically gifted, sure. I've heard the recordings. But what does she know about the life her music claims to represent? She's from Southgate, not South Central. Private school, not project housing. What struggle is she really singing about? The room went quiet. Everyone knew Amy was there. This wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was direct. Lauryn was making a point about authenticity, using Amy as an example. Amy didn't react immediately. She sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry, wasn't defensive. She just absorbed the comment like she absorbed everything else, filing it away somewhere internal. I respect her musicianship, Lauryn added, perhaps sensing the awkwardness. But there's a difference between understanding music intellectually and understanding it spiritually. You can't fake lived experience. Someone tried to change the subject, but the tension lingered. Amy remained silent, sipping her drink, watching the conversation move past her. She'd heard variations of this criticism before. The privileged white girl appropriating black musical traditions, the middle-class kid singing about working-class struggles. After about 20 minutes, Amy stood up quietly and walked toward the acoustic guitar in the corner. She didn't announce her intention, didn't ask permission. She simply picked up the instrument and began tuning it by ear. The room gradually noticed what was happening. Conversation slowed, then stopped entirely. Amy adjusted the guitar on her lap, found a comfortable position, and started playing. Amy didn't choose one of her released songs from the Frank album. She didn't play anything commercially safe or strategically calculated. Instead, she played something raw and unfinished, deeply personal, something that would later become Back to Black, but was still evolving, still searching for its ultimate final form. The guitar work was minimal, yet precisely chosen. Just basic chord progressions, nothing flashy. No jazz harmonies, or technical showing off. Just simple, honest accompaniment to what was about to come. Then she started singing. Amy's voice that night was different from her recorded work. More vulnerable, more immediate, stripped of studio polish and protective layers. She sang about love and loss, about addiction and self-destruction, about the specific kind of despair that comes from watching yourself make the same mistakes repeatedly while being powerless to stop. The lyrics weren't abstract or metaphorical poetry. They were confessional, autobiographical, uncomfortable in their specificity and honesty. She sang about needle tracks hidden under long sleeves, about empty wine bottles accumulating in corners, about calling dealers at 3 a.m. with shaking hands, about the hollow feeling of waking up next to someone whose name you couldn't remember, about the way drugs made you feel powerful and pathetic simultaneously. But more than the words, it was the way she delivered them. Amy's voice carried weight that couldn't be taught in any music school or studied in any textbook. It carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting internal battles most people couldn't imagine, the weariness of someone who understood that some wars are fought entirely within your own mind. Every note seemed to cost her something, every phrase pulled from somewhere deep and painful. Her voice cracked slightly on certain words, not from technical failure, but from emotional overflow. She wasn't performing these lyrics, she was living them in real time. Each word a small confession, each verse a piece of her soul offered to strangers in a basement. The rawness was almost unbearable to witness. The room was transfixed. These were seasoned musicians, people who'd heard thousands of performances, but Amy's voice cut through all their professional cynicism. This wasn't technique or showmanship. This was someone bleeding through music. Lauryn, who'd been sitting confidently just minutes earlier, found herself leaning forward, studying Amy's face as she sang. The casual dismissiveness was gone, replaced by recognition. She was hearing something she hadn't expected. Amy sang for maybe 4 minutes. When she finished, she set the guitar down quietly and returned to her seat without saying a word. No acknowledgement of the performance, no seeking of approval. She simply went back to observing. The silence that followed was profound. Not the polite pause before applause, but the kind of silence that happens when something real has occurred and nobody wants to be the first to cheapen it with words. Finally, someone started clapping, and the rest of the room joined in. But the applause felt inadequate, insufficient to address what had just happened. Lauryn didn't clap immediately. She sat processing what she'd heard, trying to reconcile her earlier comments with the performance she'd just witnessed. After a moment, she stood and walked over to Amy. "That was," Lauryn started, then stopped. She sat down next to Amy. "Where did that come from?" Amy looked at her directly for the first time that evening. "Same place yours does," she said quietly. "Just a different street." Lauryn nodded slowly. "I apologize. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made." "You weren't wrong about the surface stuff," Amy replied. "I did grow up comfortable. I did study the music before I lived it. But life has a way of catching up to you regardless of your postcode." They talked for a while longer, quietly away from the rest of the room. Lauryn asked about Amy's experiences, her struggles with addiction, the specific kind of pain that had shaped her songwriting. Amy was honest but not dramatic about it. She didn't romanticize her struggles or use them for sympathy. The conversation was revelatory for both of them. Lauryn realized she'd been conflating authenticity with specific types of experience, assuming that suffering only counted if it fit certain patterns. Amy discovered that her experiences, while different from Lauryn's, were equally valid sources of artistic truth. As the evening wound down, other musicians approached Amy to compliment her performance. But the most important conversation had been with Lauryn, the artist who'd challenged her right to sing about pain. Years later, after Amy's tragic death in July 2011, Lauryn was asked about that night during an interview with Rolling Stone magazine. The journalist was researching Amy's early career and had heard whispers about the legendary Brixton Gathering from multiple sources. The story had become part of London music folklore. "Did you really question her authenticity that night?" the interviewer asked, reviewing notes about the incident. "I did," Lauryn admitted, her voice heavy with regret in the weight of hindsight. "I was operating from a narrow, almost academic definition of what authentic struggle looked like. I thought pain had to be political, had to be connected to systemic oppression or structural poverty to be real, to be worthy of musical expression." "What specifically changed your mind?" "Hearing her sing that night. The moment she opened her mouth, everything I thought I knew about authenticity crumbled. Amy taught me that addiction is its own kind of oppression, that self-destruction is its own form of struggle that doesn't discriminate based on your postcode or bank account. You can grow up privileged and still find ways to destroy yourself, still find authentic pain to draw from." The interviewer pressed further. "Do you regret challenging her publicly like that?" Lauryn paused for a long moment, staring out the studio window. "I regret the way I did it, the assumptions I made about her life based on her background. But I don't regret that it led to that performance. That night, she sang like someone who understood that authenticity isn't about your background or your struggle resume. It's about your willingness to be brutally honest about whatever your background gave you, comfortable or uncomfortable." "How did that night influence your own approach to music?" "It completely expanded my definition of realness. I'd been unconsciously gatekeeping authenticity, deciding who had the right to sing about struggle based on their biography. Amy showed me that suffering is tragically democratic. It finds everyone eventually, regardless of their starting point or their advantages." The interviewer pressed further. "What do you think made her voice so powerful that night?" Lauryn's voice became quieter, more reflective. "Amy wasn't performing that night. She was confessing. There's a difference between singing about pain and singing through pain. She was doing the latter. Every word cost her something." "Did you stay in touch afterward?" "We crossed paths a few more times. Always respectful, always real conversations. I watched her career explode, watched her struggles become public. I worried about her." "Any final thoughts about Amy's legacy?" Lauryn was quiet for nearly a minute before responding. Amy Winehouse was the most honest artist I ever encountered. Not because she had the most dramatic story, but because she refused to lie about her story, whatever it was. She taught me that authenticity isn't about suffering the right way. It's about being truthful about how you suffer. The story of that November night in Brixton became somewhat legendary among London musicians who were there. People who witnessed it would tell the story for years, often embellishing details but always returning to the central truth. The moment when two powerful artists collided and both emerged changed. It represented something profound about artistic authenticity, about the dangerous territory between appreciation and appropriation, about the difference between lived experience and performed experience. But the real lesson transcended individual artists or specific genres. It wasn't about who was more authentic or who had suffered more legitimately. Both Lauryn and Amy were drawing from real experience, real pain, real understanding earned through different but equally valid paths. The lesson was about keeping an open mind in a judgmental industry, about recognizing that authenticity can emerge from unexpected places and unexpected people. Lauryn Hill questioned Amy Winehouse's street credibility that night and received an answer that fundamentally redefined what street credibility meant. Amy didn't argue or defend herself through words or explanations. She simply sang her truth with devastating honesty and let that truth speak for itself, proving that the most powerful arguments aren't made through debate, but through demonstration. That basement performance proved that authenticity isn't determined by your zip code, your family's income, or your documented struggles. It's about your willingness to be unflinchingly honest about whatever your life has given you, comfortable or uncomfortable, privileged or struggling, easy or impossible. Amy's response to Lauryn's challenge wasn't defensive or aggressive or calculated. It was simply, powerfully, undeniably true. And sometimes in a world full of manufactured personas and strategic positioning, truth becomes the most radical act of all.